we're at a point now where it's really even in question whether people can afford to even have pets.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Term Sheet Podcast. I'm Allie Garfinkel, senior writer here at Fortune. And every week on Term Sheet, we go over the latest deals, news, and insights in venture capital, private equity, and startups. Here is where you can listen to some of the most exciting figures in the private markets. And this week, I want to talk about something that I've been asking people about for months. Will we ever see a $1 trillion startup? Now, I asked a bunch of people this question, probably dozens of VCs on and off the record, and almost everyone unanimously, to my surprise, to my editor's surprise, said yes. And to be fair, OpenAI is about halfway there, valued at $500 billion. So recently I've been going around asking people, if we are going to see a $1 trillion startup, if we can call it such a thing, what should we call it? Unicorns refer to, of course, billion-dollar startups, a term coined by Aileen Lee more than a decade ago. And I think it's time to coin another term. Some of my favorite terms that have come back to me so far include gigacorn, terracap, triceratops. One of my suggestions is dragon. However, I would argue the best suggestion is kaiju corn. Kaiju is a Japanese term for a giant strange beast, most commonly referred to as Godzilla. I love all of these names. I would love to hear more names from all of you, but it is important to say that calling a company with a $1 trillion valuation a startup is a little bit of a misnomer. As one person pointed out to me, that's basically its own economy. Speaking of companies that are basically their own economies, OpenAI recently released its much anticipated, long rumored web browser called ChatGPT Atlas. It's important to say for anyone watching, why does a web browser matter? Why was there so much fur and rumor around this in the first place? Think about it in terms of Google Chrome, so named for a reason. Google, of course, internally developed Chrome around 2008. If you own a web browser and you're in the search business, it is a way to own that search experience. And OpenAI has certainly expressed interest in ChatGPT being a place where search can really happen and live for consumers. Now, it's important to say there have been a lot of mixed to positive reviews of the product itself, but Atlas also has brought up some concerns around privacy and data collection. And now it's time to talk about pets. Actually, I'm sort of serious because this week's guest is Steven Eidelman, founder and CEO of Modern Animal, which is a veterinary clinic network. It is backed by a number of VCs, including Upfront Ventures and Founders Fund. Recently, Modern Animal raised $46 million in Series D funding. And I am so excited that Steven is here. I've been tracking his company for about 18 months, give or take. And one of the things I find fascinating about Steven is I think he is good at something very few founders are good at, which is setting up why his business is important in the broader context of the macroeconomy. Steven, like almost no one else I've met, is really good at establishing why Modern Animal is at the intersection of all kinds of economic trends, from inflation, labor dynamics, concerns around healthcare pricing, concerns around how consumer behavior is evolving, and of course, the ways in which how we feel about our pets is evolving. Veterinary clinics as businesses are in a time of serious transition. And talking to Steven, I find, illuminates not only where pet care has been, but where it could be going. Here's Steven. And it's game time. Welcome to the Term Sheet Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Allie.
I am really excited you're here because we get to talk about pets. But there's a lot involved in that. And I want to actually go back to the beginning for you. You have a background as an investor in part. What do you consider your first term sheet?
My first term sheet. Well, I did a couple deals as an investor and then realized I had so much admiration for the founders that I was trying to invest in that I had to go do it myself. So I started my first company in 2012, and we went to pitch our lead investor at their annual summit. And I'll never forget the partner who led the deal for us. This was for my company Whistle, came to our hotel room where we were staying in the hotel where their annual summit was, and came to kind of give us the good news that the partnership had approved the deal. And so that was my first term sheet.
Pet care is a famously tough business. Why did you decide the veterinary business was ripe for disruption when you started Modern Animal?
So the first company was in the pet space, And what was hard about that was we were doing hardware. So to your point, couldn't just go do software, had to go do hardware. Um, and then after that, when we sold that business, we sold it to a company that started buying a few really large veterinary companies as part of their broader strategy around pet care and pet health specifically. And what was amazing to see when they had brought some of these businesses in, they acquired a few businesses. That people might know VCA, Banfield. They have a few thousand hospitals around the U.S. Um, I started to learn a lot more about the veterinarian, the experience that they were having working in a practice, and of course, as a pet owner, I've had dogs my whole life. There was a lot more I expected from my own experience going to the vet. Um, but in that moment, I was pretty set on I want to build a software company. I don't want to go do something so hard again. And the challenge was like once I saw the need to build a fundamentally different experience for pet owners like myself, and even more, I'd say more motivating for me was for the veterinarians and technicians and people who work in a practice. You couldn't unsee it.
I was gonna say, what do you feel like people don't consider enough or don't even fully understand about the veterinary business and sort of the challenges that a lot of vets face?
A lot of people think about the puppies and kittens and how fun it must be. And a lot of people think about, from a business perspective, what a great business. There's been dozens of private equity firms that have been attracted to the category in recent years to buy up clinics. There's been a huge backlash against that now. So I think what people don't realize is, well, what is it that makes this industry really tick? It isn't just four wall EBITDA. It isn't just, being able to roll up clinics. And it isn't just about, pets. It's really about this incredible ecosystem that developed of people, first and foremost, who are wildly passionate about doing this work, which is providing care to animals, right? The motivation that someone has to have to pursue this as a career is tremendous. To go to veterinary school for 4 years, to accrue a lot of debt, to deal with the ups and downs of providing care on a day-to-day basis, you only choose to do that because you love animals and you want so deeply to commit your life and your career to caring for them. And there's a lot of negotiating that has to happen along the way of how do you balance cost of care with the reality of the care that might be needed in any given moment in time. How do you balance your own sanity, and dealing with all the difficult things that might come in, from one appointment to the next. It can be life-saving care one moment to just a difficult customer conversation because someone's unhappy about the price you're charging for something versus something that's online. So there's a lot of complexity in the day to day. I think it gets taken for granted is what I would say.
I remember vividly the first time you and I talked about this, and I think we talked about how there are actually very high suicide rates among vets, and it had never occurred to me not only the depth of the challenge emotionally, but logistically, because unlike a human, a dog can't talk back to you and say, "This is what I want." You only have the owner and whatever diagnosis you're able to make, and it creates a lot of uncertainty around something that's really important to people. People, I mean, we talked about this a lot during COVID, but people love their pets a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion in this industry. I think that's what gets taken for granted when people think about this as a business. This is really a line of work people do purely out of passion. And then the customers are there because they love this being that they're seeking care for more than anything. Especially now, younger generations of pet owners really do treat pets as children. And you're on a regular basis navigating these life and death decisions and also very expensive care decisions. Yeah, I think a lot of times people leave a veterinary practice and say, I can't believe it's so expensive. I must be getting ripped off. But the thing that a lot of consumers don't appreciate and the general population doesn't appreciate is we are providing care as a veterinary practice that is equivalent in many cases to the care you receive as a human being for a fraction of the cost. We don't have a payer system. We don't have Medicare. We don't have employer-based healthcare, right? So even if you have pet insurance, you're still paying full freight, either for the insurance or for the care without insurance. And it's really expensive. And so that adds a heightened sense of sensitivity to those conversations. And for the veterinarian, it's a really complex. And when I say veterinarian, I really am talking about the veterinary professionals, whether it's a paraprofessional, the technicians or nurses, or the doctors, and everyone else who's involved in providing care. They are having to deal with their own challenges of how do I recommend care that someone may not be able to afford and feel okay when they reject that care. And I know that that patient requires that care. That can be heartbreaking.
What is your view on how private equity has affected the veterinary business as a whole?
Yeah, this has become a really big topic lately. I think important to note that, first of all, this has been happening for some time. Veterinary practices started being rolled up really in the late 80s, early 90s. And it started to hit fever pitch sort of in the 2010s, up until the end of sort of COVID and when interest rates were zero. Um, People realized this is a good business. The secular trends towards younger, you know, populations getting pets at a higher rate, more, especially during COVID, the pandemic. And so that drew a lot of interest from private equity. What happened over the last few years is as COVID sort of subsided and things had started to revert back to normal, um, there's all these new players and all this private equity capital that's come into this category, and it's seeking a return. And historically, how would they do that? They would raise price, they would optimize operations, right? They would try to lower costs. And so once enough hospitals, I think, had been bought in this country, and now demand has kind of reverted back. It's not COVID where everyone and their mom is getting a pet, right? And no one can get into their local neighborhood vet. All of a sudden, sort of the tide's gone back out, and a lot of these private equity owned practices are being forced to reckon with, well, I don't know how to really create a better place to actually work. I don't know how to actually create a better experience for a customer. And so they're struggling. And in their attempts to sort of improve the business while they're struggling leads them to further want to increase price, leads them to further want to squeeze margins. And what that I think does is it starts to become really obvious to the consumer. And so you're starting to see a lot of people complain about it. And how is it manifested? It's manifested in the form of higher prices, but that is not necessarily just because of private equity. We've seen broad-based inflation in all categories, and we've seen about 60% higher prices in veterinary care, which is almost 2x what we've seen outside of this industry broadly in the economy. And so when you ask yourself, well, is that because of private equity? Not necessarily. I think that's an easy scapegoat. I think the reality is 50% of revenue of most veterinary practices is labor. So we've seen a huge increase in labor costs. Wages have gone up. Doctors are earning more, which is great because this is a population of people that have historically been underpaid. But it has to show up in the costs that we all as pet owners pay. Also the cost of the other inputs, diagnostics, supplies, things like that. All of that has gone up as well. So now we are facing this situation where a lot of private equity consolidators have bought up a lot of hospitals. Costs are higher, and the consumer is left really asking themselves, can I even afford to have a pet?
The thing I've sort of learned as I've sort of spent time working on this story and as we've gotten to know each other a little bit from you is that the vet business as a business is evolving and has to evolve, right? It's sort of at maybe not an inflection point, but a moment of substantial pressure. How do you think about modern animals business model today and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, the industry has to change. And I saw that in 2018 when I started the company. But it's interesting now with technology accelerating, even in an industry that has resisted technological change, like the veterinary industry. Now with AI, it's sort of inevitable. And so the change is coming. I think that at Modern Animal, my view is we have a role to play in shepherding the future, and we're building the future of veterinary care. That's our mission. How do we do it thoughtfully? How do we integrate technology in a really intentional way to make the thing that everyone is here for, which is care for the animal, to be optimized, right? So that means make it easier for a veterinarian or a technician to deliver care, make it easier for a pet owner to understand the care, to have a direct relationship with the veterinarian. Those are the things that have been pressured, right? As the demands of the pet owner have increased, as the work-life balance has been challenged. The veterinary profession now is about 80% female, 90% of graduates coming out of veterinary school are women. The needs are different. We see a huge increase in the number of veterinarians who don't want to work full-time anymore. They work relief shifts or they want to work part-time. So there's a huge need for optimizing the workflow, eliminating the things that take up a ton of time that don't actually further the thing that the veterinarian went to school for, the technician went to school for, which is to practice medicine, and the thing that we as pet owners go for, which is help me with my pet's issue right now. So our goal is, how do we continue to build a platform and a system that makes that as easy as possible? And it will never be easy, right? Because of all the things we've talked about today. So that's really the business model, is make it the absolute best place to deliver medicine and to access care.
What does it actually mean to implement AI in veterinary care?
I think what's fascinating about AI right now for service companies is, there's a lot of work that gets done that is inefficient, and there's no other way to do it other than a person historically doing it. And I think software has had an opportunity to streamline some of those things, but deterministic software is pretty rigid. And I think veterinary care and in healthcare in general, it's not black and white. It's not if this, then that. Um, there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more subjectivity. There's a lot of connecting different dots. So our mental model for AI has been, first of all, it's here and it's happening, and it is up to us to choose to embrace it or not. And I'm seeing a lot of innovative thinkers in this industry for the first time really start to be much louder in their voice around this. Individual practitioners, practice owners, and other groups where people are saying it's happening and we can either choose to be a part of it this time or we can reject it. Let's be a part of it. And so I think there's a lot of people being really creative around how AI impacts this profession, finally, because that was not the case with technology broadly.
I was gonna say, because you say this time very specifically, implying that maybe there was the mobile wave got missed, the shift to cloud
Yes.
got missed. I mean, what are we talking about here?
I'll never forget going to an industry conference, and there was a veterinarian on stage speaking who you could sense like his practice had been impacted, and it sucks. You built this practice over a long period of time and your business is being impacted by this force technology, this,
A force that that you cannot name or does not have a
yes.
face. It is just technology, a broad sweeping historical force.
And it was like, we have to beat it. It's like, how do we beat, um, the way Uber beat taxis? Like, how do we win? And that was the wrong approach, of course. Right. And I think this time, there is a number of, veterinarians who I follow and listen to what they say and what they write, who are being really thoughtful with just in their own practice, how they're implementing technology and AI specifically. And so I think the way we approach it, we started our sort of AI journey, um, really testing, like, how do you summarize things really easily, take the cognitive load off of the doctor who has to look at, like, my dog, Layla's medical records at Modern Animal are 400 pages. And she's like pretty healthy. I'm a very paranoid pet owner, but she loves chocolate, and that's a problem for her. And so there's a lot of history. Reading all of her history is not possible for a human being, right? And so I, as a pet owner, expect my doctor to have read the notes, to know everything, but it's not physically possible. So AI makes that easier, right? How do we summarize the past? How do we summarize, how do we transcribe the medical notes during the appointment? How do we summarize the discharge instructions and the follow-up care? It starts to get a little bit dicey when you start thinking, well, how do we use AI to interpret diagnostics? How do we use AI to aid clinical decisions? So that's where I think for us, the thing that we've built uniquely, I think a lot of muscle around at Modern Animal, is our care team are partners in building all of this. When we roll out features, they're piloting it. They're part of the team that's building that feature. They're raising their hand and they're saying, I'm interested in this feature. I asked for it. I want to help pilot it. I want to iterate on it. I want to provide feedback, and I will let you know when it's ready to go live. That's not how we used to do it, and that did not work. So we built this like change management culture around everything. It could be operational workflows or technology changes that allow us to iterate quickly and stay safe. Because staying safe is really, really important when you try to change anything, I think, in healthcare.
Well, and sort of to this point, when we've talked before, you've said, hey, if someone who I really respect says we need to stop this right now or stop and reassess what we're doing here, you've said, okay, got it, pulling the plug, start over.
Yeah, and that wasn't the case before. So no, we've done all of our beta testing and our QAing and everything is ready to go. But until, I'm thinking of specific doctors on our team who I really trust and have not always listened to, but like Dr. Brookenthal in Glendale, like our lead doctor there, who was a software engineer early in his career, like if he says something's not ready, it's not going to go live. And we as a team have had to learn, how do you iterate in a category that has historically rejected technology or had at least a very hard time incorporating it.
Well, and sort of to your point about industries that have resisted technology, I know you've been looking to retail businesses for inspiration lately. Why?
So a lot of the veterinary industry has been, in recent years, as we talked about earlier, mostly people selling legacy practices. And when we started Modern Animal, we said, okay, we have to build from scratch. And the reasons for that were there was just too much historical legacy that would not allow for us to change things and build a unified culture, and really build the brand and the experience that we wanted. So we said, okay, we're not going to buy existing practices. We're going to build our own. What starts to happen is the core motions of the business started to look a lot like retail. Identifying real estate, building out the clinic itself, managing costs, timelines. How do you have a really strong leadership muscle and bench around local leaders, and what do they own and what do you own centrally? How do you think about expanding to a new market versus densifying an existing market? All of these learnings were not learnable within the veterinary industry. And that's where I had been continuing to look for learnings. They were learned many times over by many incredible retail brands that we all know. And so I finally started to seek out wisdom from those folks. And I wish I had done it sooner because there was countless mistakes we could have avoided. But talking to, great companies like Starbucks, Sweetgreen, Kava, Oak Street Health, One Medical, all these companies had to learn these lessons, whether it was healthcare or retail. And it was very easy to be cynical and say, oh, well, we're so different from a coffee shop. Well, of course we are. We're a healthcare practice. But if we don't get the real estate right, if we don't know how to build it out, if we don't know how to build a really strong culture of local leadership, regional leadership, and growth and development, we're never going to succeed building de novo physical locations. So that's where we spent a lot of time learning over the last year. And it's completely changed my approach to how we built this company.
What has it most changed?
First off, the pacing. This is not, I think a lot of companies during ZERP and when capital was freely available thought, let me go raise as much capital as possible and go as fast as possible. I'm going to go plant flags in a bunch of different markets. I'm going to go broad. Everybody would ask me, when are you going national? I love Modern Animal. Like, when are you coming to X, Y, or Z city? And a learning lesson was, it is way easier for us to open our 15th clinic in LA than it is to open our first in Seattle. And so that was not easy as an ambitious entrepreneur who, even my own team was pushing, hey, I want to go open Modern Animal Denver. And we've had a lot of success with that. For example, in Denver, we had 2 of our doctors from Culver City went and opened that location. Day one, Modern Animal Denver has the same high bar that Modern Animal everywhere else has. And that's incredibly powerful. But doing it in the right way, in the right time, when our marketing plan is dialed in and we have our resources available and focused to support that, has been a big lesson. So how the pacing, the resourcing required, and just a simple, just given I'm talking to you and what, and what you cover, the return on capital is way faster and is way more efficient as a business to grow when you're growing in a place that has existing awareness and existing density. In LA, on a day-to-day basis, I run into customers of ours.
I've seen this happen.
You did see it happen.
I have seen you run into a customer unplanned.
Yeah, so I was just on a flight back from Austin, where we have a few clinics, last week, and I sat in an aisle next to a customer of ours who has been a member of ours since 2020, and we spoke the entire flight back about his experience. I gave him a little bit of a view into some of the things that are coming in the roadmap. I got his feedback, but the number of people he has referred in LA, that alone shows how powerful this sort of organic growth and densification. And that's how a lot of these brands, if you really think about how long did it take for Starbucks to become the Starbucks that we now know, it took decades. And I think we all got a little bit overexcited about, technology, capital is available. Let's go fast. We're going to build this technology-enabled service. And then companies like us thought we could do that across so many other categories. And the hard lesson has been, you cannot take shortcuts. This is a people-driven business. This is all about delivering, first and foremost, always impeccable healthcare, delivering an experience that allows for the best communication between the veterinarian and the pet owner possible, building the best place for people to work and build their careers. And that is it's not just the brick and mortar aspect of it. It is the people aspect of it. You cannot shortcut.
This is the part where I come completely clean about why I was so excited to have you on. I have come to realize, and it sounds like I hope this is something that the audience that's listening has, is that you exist at all kinds of intersections. Healthcare, consumer, really sensitive to inflation, right? You sort of exist at this, you have a very clear view of the consumer. Um, Stephen, what can pets tell us about the state of the consumer and the state of America?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting sitting in my seat watching this category that for a long time people have said is like impervious to the ups and downs of the economy, and I think it's just fundamentally not true. I think what's happened for us coming out of COVID is you've had an entire generation, a couple generations of people who have not had the same prospects career wise, job wise, whose affordability of housing and of life has gone way up, all the way through to affording a pet. And so, for a long time, we talk about people are not having kids or they're getting pets or having kids later as a boon for veterinary care. But I think what we're actually seeing is that we're at a point now where it's really even in question whether people can afford to even have pets. So I think we have a real problem with, just consumer. I think the consumer at a certain level of income is able to spend and is fine. But I really worry about the affordability of pet care. There's an organization I work with called Emancipet where we serve lower income areas and folks who may not be able to afford care at a traditional practice. And the amount of need and demand for our services that we have is tremendous. And the work that people are willing to do, the amount of patients who are willing to see to help this population is incredible. But we are small, we don't have a scalable solution yet to serve people everywhere with veterinary care. I think this is true of so many categories right now, right? So I think we are in a state of post-COVID. Inflation has been severe in so many categories. Tariffs are not helping. They don't really impact veterinary care as much as other categories, but it's sort of the additional hit we did not need. But I think we're going to have to work through this, and the consumer is stretched.
It's the sort of thing where, on one hand, it's not surprising to hear you say that. And on the other, there's sort of a stark clarity. People feel like they're struggling to afford pets. That feels like very different from a few years ago. But what is it? And we'll sort of leave it here. What does it tell you about what the future looks like? Where do you think this is all going? Not only for the consumer, but for the future of pets?
I think that there's a trend towards wanting or having access to as much information as possible, right? So part of what's made, whether it's care for ourselves as humans, care for our children, care for our pets, so much more expensive is that we now have access to better care, right? That's been a huge driver of costs in veterinary care, is that we now have access to much more advanced cancer treatments, much more advanced surgical procedures, more advanced drugs. That care is expensive. And it's not just all the dynamics we described before, but it's the options that we have available at our fingertips and the visibility and access we have to that information that is available to consider for ourselves or for our pets. And so that's partially what's both exciting, but also making it challenging, right? I now know that there's all these options, and I am psychologically probably more inclined to go through the extra steps, to go and incur the extra expense that maybe my parents or my grandparents were not willing to incur on behalf of my pet or even on behalf of myself, right? That is what's driving this tension. So on one hand, it's really exciting. I think we talked about AI earlier. AI is, I think, going to undoubtedly make drug discovery easier, again, for ourselves and for our pets. It's going to lower the cost of care in many aspects. We're going to allow for, our teams to be more efficient, not to just jam through a bunch more patients, but if the goal is to maximize the time spent with the patient, if we're cutting out hours of time a day spent on administrative work, well, can we see more patients, right? If we see more patients, can we actually lower the cost of care? Now, I think what we all know is that usually prices don't go down, but can we at least stop having them go up at this crazy pace that we've had, even if we are able to pay our people more, which we need to do also because their cost of living is going up. So overall, I'm very optimistic that the technology shift we're seeing will actually bear a lot of fruit for efficiency and better care. But it will always be in tension with this increased desire and transparency that we all now have to information and access to care and visibility to that care. And that's a tension I think we will continue to see bear out across, all healthcare disciplines over the next few years.
The only last question I have is, when was the last time your dog Layla ate chocolate? And was it
She
recent?
she didn't get any chocolate recently, but
That's
she
good.
did eat like half a box of cereal that was delivered by Amazon and I left at our front door yesterday.
What
So
kind of cereal?
I'm looking over her. She's right here. It's just Cheerios. That's all we've let our kids eat so far, but
Is
they
she
weren't
Can you
very
bring her on
happy.
camera? Can she come?
She's
Yes. We need a
let's
pet
see.
sighting. Oh, she's been there the whole time. Hi,
Layla.
Layla. Well, Layla, welcome to the Term Sheet Podcast. And Steven, thank you so much.
Thanks, Allie. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
This story makes me think about two things. The first is that I have not spent nearly enough time considering the challenges that a small business like a vet clinic really has, particularly the ways in which it's sensitive to macroeconomic changes, but also the ways in which the business model is changing and under a lot of pressure. The other thing this makes me think about is what I sometimes call my parents in Florida test. Hi, mom and dad. The parents in Florida test is very simple. I actually do have parents in Florida, and sometimes I will look at stories and say, will my mom and dad care about this? And I think in the case of Modern Animal, the answer is absolutely yes. Why? Because they love the Garfinkel family dogs very much. Like I'm sure you love your dogs. And I do think we can all agree that we do want a better world for pet care because that's actually a better world for us all. Lots of startups are really interested in solving the problems of the future or this niche software problem. And I think there is something really powerful about the fact that Modern Animal is solving something that is really tactile, really personal, and will always be important. That's it for Term Sheet this week. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Term Sheet is a Fortune Magazine podcast. Our producer-editor is Allison Rogers. Our executive producer is Lydia Randall. Our production manager is Sam Freund. Fortune's head of video is Adam Bannicky.